Well, Happy New Year, everyone. This is Chris Kopak, APA President, and also Assistant Vice President at the University of Arizona. Well, we might have a new year, but we're continuing giving back to all our members, and that has been just a huge theme that we've had this past year, harnessing and transferring the knowledge. With so many folks retiring from our industry and our facilities departments, we really want to be able to harness that information and share that. And our business partners play a key role in doing that. Today, we have the pleasure of having McKinstry Industry. They will be talking about harnessing the noise. And how appropriate is that? Harnessing the noise, how facilities condition assessments empower decision makers to make better data-driven investments. We have Phil Saig, Technical Director from McKinstry out of Colorado, and also Rick Cochran, the account executive. As we've done in the past, we'll have about 40-45 minutes of presentation. We then will have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. We also will have the PowerPoint presentation loaded up on the APA website. It usually takes about a week, along with all questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to send those. We'll mix them into the presentation and also spend time at the end. And with that said, Phil, Rick, we appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedule. We have a large group, and really you look at the topic, harnessing the noise, facilities condition assessments. Our buildings are getting much older after World War II, and we have a large audience of APA who's interested in this topic. So I'll turn it over to both of you guys, and thank you for joining and helping APA.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity today, everyone. My name is Philip Saig. I'm the Technical Director with McKinstry. I'm located actually out of our Denver office, and I'm joined today by Rick Cochran, one of our facility condition experts and account executives in McKinstry, joining us out of actually our Seattle office. So, as I said, happy to be here with you today, and really what we're going to be talking about when it comes to addressing our facilities, capital planning, project planning, understanding what's in our facilities, the condition of our different equipment and our approaches to how we manage those facilities. One of the common phrases that we talk about a lot in universities is deferred maintenance. That's a common phrase I'm sure everyone on the call is very familiar with, and sometimes that brings up connotations that can be stressful and difficult, as we're always struggling to keep our buildings up to date, as Chris is mentioning, aging facilities over time. We've kind of taken an approach with our partners, learned from a lot of universities around the country, and really want to rethink that term and rethink that approach from not just seeing what's in the buildings and making a list of deferred maintenance, but really thinking about how we're going to invest in our buildings and really optimize them for efficiencies. It's really critical when we're putting money and prioritizing our different equipment and different programs in our facilities, that we're not just putting money into those facilities to not make them any better than they were before, right? Just updating a little bit here and there and replacing like for like equipment, but really rethinking a little bit. And if we're going to put a lot of money into these facilities, how can we make that an actual true investment that has a return for our mission and our stakeholders and customers on campus? So what I'm going to do here is we're going to go through a slide presentation here for the first half of this webinar, and then the second half, Rick is actually going to take us through a live demonstration of some of these projects using outside of PowerPoint software. So kind of first thinking about this, we talked a little bit about deferred maintenance already. Facilities are becoming obviously more complex than ever. There's a lot going on in our facilities, and we can't treat them the same way that we always have. These facilities have all kinds of issues with them. Some are really great, some we wouldn't even maybe describe as issues. They're enhancements, complicated control systems, is wonderful, right? We've got the ability to control equipment in a new way. We're able to control multiple types of equipment in ways we couldn't in the past. And so the fact that some of these buildings have these complicated control systems is a real advantage to our maintenance and management. However, they require a different level of sophistication to engage with. Our buildings are always under scrutiny during the construction process, of course, and this kind of value to engineered changes we don't always get exactly what we want. Sometimes new construction funding from the facilities and operations side I've heard deemed as, the gift that keeps on taking, meaning that, sometimes we raise funds and we're able to build pretty snazzy buildings, but often not with additional budgets and additional teams to maintain those facilities. And sometimes we make decisions during design and construction where we can value engineer out some of the operations-focused items and some of the, what bells and whistles that we would need to really get access to manage those buildings properly. So, here's an example, right, of the building complexity that we're dealing with now. We've got digital systems, video, intrusion detection, HVAC, of course, and fire alarm and your standards, but also enhanced security and access controls throughout the facility. Most of our buildings now have fairly advanced lighting controls. We've been dealing with lighting control for quite some time, occupancy sensors, vacancy sensors, basic lighting controls, but now we're dealing with integrated panels and lighting controls that are, staging on their own, turning off on their own, and working actually in concert with our building automation system panels. And if those, in many cases, our lighting controls can control our HVAC, where, lighting in those facilities may be turning off because, it's a vacant space, a conference room, and that's actually triggering a setback in our HVAC and cooling down that room, not making us keep it at 72, but maybe only 68 in the winter or 74 in the summer or something like that. So this added complexity, really, when we're taking a look at capital planning and replacing equipment, this condition assessment becomes pretty complicated, because if I want to replace an old lighting control system or put a one in, now I've got to think, how does that integrate with my HVAC system, not just lighting by itself or just replacing the light bulb. We talk about energy supply and load demand, water management systems, treatment, energy information systems, all kinds of service requirements. Hey, sometimes we might find that something needs to be replaced or put into place and addressed, but it's very hard to get to. You might need a boom lift in an atrium or along, different ladder, or pipes are in front of it and there's no way to unscrew the thing that you need to unscrew. We've all come across that probably in our maintenance lives. And so these are all things that we want to take into consideration when doing a complex facility condition assessment. And so not only are buildings complex, but they also change over time. So, buildings last a long time, especially on our university campuses, and can get reused. New programs can move in. What was once just a classroom building can now be a teaching lab classroom building, and fume hoods get added in, and different air change requirements be put into place. We see this reuse happening in campuses all over the country, and that changing becomes pretty important to address in a condition assessment. We have to think not only about the facility, but the use of that facility. What's the point, right? What are we trying to do with that as an organization? So we want to address that in our facility conditions. Here's a couple funny ones I just found I wanted to throw in here. This is a boat being reused as a house, and then some of our sewer piping, right, being used as an instrument. There's a little tongue in cheek here, but the reality is we do see, our facilities being used in ways that we probably never would have imagined. And sometimes they're being used that way and we don't even know until we go and do a comprehensive assessment. We learn about how our facilities are being used in ways that we didn't imagine. So what becomes really important when we think about that is the information that we're trying to gather. So we have two issues that we need to address when it comes to all this information. One, the first one here up on the screen, is too much data, not enough answers. This gets to, Chris mentioned in the kickoff in the beginning about making data-driven decisions. Having the data is not the problem. All those systems have data, they put that data out, but it's very difficult to make sense of it. How do I prioritize all that? I've got lots of different requests, and of course I have a limited budget and limited time to address these issues. So how do I make sense of all this information? I sort of start data drowning in my building information systems. And then on the flip side of that, we have holes in our data. So when there's gaps in the information, then we also run into problems, because maybe the systems are in place or installed in place to provide us that information. But since we can't make sense of all that and we're sort of data drowning, now we don't even know that we have gaps in the information. What we thought was maybe a complete picture of how a system was operating is actually not the case, and we may not have the whole picture. Example on, you get these icons in the bottom of the screen. One of those is the wireless, right? Sometimes we put walls in and we reconfigure our spaces, and we don't realize that we're inhibiting, cellular connection in the facilities. Are we, when we're doing a condition assessment, are we thinking about our in-building wireless systems and how those are being affected by the programming changes that we're making? These are of course, especially when it comes to lab buildings and research facilities, these things become really important. And we have a lot of opportunities to actually, maybe challenges that we can possibly inhibit the success of our patrons if we cut off their connections. So, again, it's more complex, and this data thing becomes pretty darn important. So there is a cost, of course, everyone knows, to the reactive mindset. So not having the information when we're not thinking about facility condition assessments on a proactive level, but we're sort of waiting a long time to do those, we can run into different issues. And the colleges and universities, are unique. You guys face a unique challenge. We all do on campuses that, are different than our commercial buildings and our school, K-12 school districts and our healthcare facilities. And we've got a very specific set of unique challenges. First of all, our facilities are diverse with lots of different user demands. It's not like all we do is manage one classroom building. We've got all kinds of facilities. Some of those are auxiliary facilities if they're under our guidance. Some of those are all the different teaching facilities out there, research labs, libraries, you kind of name it. We've got these different use types. No granularity of data is the other key component. We kind of touched on that one already in terms of metering and getting that information. So I'll kind of blow by that topic a little bit. But Chris also mentioned the aging workforce out there. It's been something we've been dealing with for some time, and we really have on campus, a few people generally on our facilities teams that know a whole lot about our buildings, but we lack the documented information there and the documented knowledge on those facilities. And it sort of resides as what we call institutional knowledge, or lives within a few gatekeepers or a few people's minds. And so we want to, when we're doing our assessments, we don't want to just, go and look at the building. I don't want to walk through the building, say, hey, there's an asset right there's an air handler. How old is it? Let me take the nameplate data, write it down, put it in a spreadsheet, look up the RS means cost on it, and then project back what the replacement cost is in 4 years. I also want to understand what's going on with the people that actually know about that facility. What is the institutional knowledge as well, and get that into the documented locations as well. So that becomes really important. Of course, we've got limited budgets. Operating budgets, or even losing capital budgets, are hard to come by in some cases because of the competing departments. And so we're pressured then, right? We're pressured to do more with less. So we got to think about, how are we prioritizing, and are we doing that as well as we can? Again, on the challenge side, higher education campuses can be more vulnerable because without the information to justify the funds, it's really hard to get the funds. And that's what we want to do here, is move from an anecdotal story that we're telling about our facility is really old and it needs some money. You might not win that competition with, the new researcher that's coming to town that we want to build for, or, what maybe a possible donor wants to bring to the game. We want to get our information together, get it straight, prioritize it, and make a solid case to our financial leaders in our universities to be able to get that funding. And that goes for not just the capital improvements, but also the operations side. The staffing needs of those facilities become really important, and the system upgrades that we need to maintain those complex systems in our facilities. So here's an example of, when I say the status quo is not an option anymore, this is an example of a university I was working at here recently. I just snapped this picture on my phone, but condition assessment equipment, or comprehensive information on the facility that was taken in a condition assessment type report, and here it is in 3 binders in the mechanical room. I don't know if this report was paid for or how it came to be, but I can tell you that when the information lives in a report, whether it's a 3-ring binder like this or just one Excel spreadsheet or big Excel workbook, it becomes dated. very, very quickly, because as we talked about, our facilities are changing, their uses are changing, and also equipment is changing. Things are breaking, right? Maintenance is changing. And so once you can spend a lot of time and money investing in a comprehensive condition assessment, put it into a static place like a 3-ring binder or an Excel workbook, and that loses its value right after the time you got that value once, and now it's gone. 1 year later, 2 years later, it's pretty tough to update those or keep them relevant and useful to you in making those decisions. So the kind of facility assessment needs to be consultative in that way. It needs to document, it needs to analyze, and the key thing here is it needs to make the data actionable. So we need to not only have the report, but we need to know that we can act on it, and act on it in a way that we can be confident. And what I mean specifically there is when we're identifying capital planning priorities, we got to trust that information. It's no matter what format you use, whether it's fancy software or 3-ring binders or what, it's junk in, junk out, right? If we're not confident in the analysis that's taken place, or confident in the pricing that's going into there, and the assumptions are clear, and the costing methodology is clear and well vetted, we're not going to be able to trust that document. Or worse, we're going to trust that document and just be flat out wrong, right? Because then we get into construction problems, and our budgets are too short now at that place. So that becomes really, really important as we get into this. Typical process overview, for condition assessments, really, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but understanding the document review period, gathering all that information, on-site analysis and walkthroughs, and team updates, and data organization, cost estimating, and then finally the report generating or the asset generating information. And we kind of break that up into 4 big stages. Sort of, we learn what's going on as a team, right? All of us that are involved, whether it's McKinstry or somebody else or the university, whatever team is working on this is an applicable process. So, learn what you know, audit the facility, analyze the information, and finally report out and conversate about that information. And so when we first talk about learning, I mentioned this a little bit already, we don't want to just talk about the campus needs in terms of the facility itself, but we like to break it up into 3 different ways: the condition of the equipment and the buildings and the assets, the operational components, and the programming or the organizational component. So I'll just pick out a couple examples here, but existing problems need planning and long-term solution in lieu of Band-Aids. Okay, that's a condition issue and an operational issue, not much of an organizational issue. Recent capital projects have failed to meet expectations of efficiency and instead have created more headaches and disruptions. Okay, that's an operational issue, right? That's where that's focused in, and maybe what's going on there is we're causing more headache by putting in more complicated systems that have actually become less efficient because they had all these bells and whistles on them, but we've got no operational training or staffing or resources to then use them as they were intended to be used. Next one here, understaffed with aging workforce or non-technical capabilities and a resistance to change or improvements. Okay, so that's an organizational asset inventory that you're taking. Where are we at in terms of staffing levels, and what skill sets do we have? Are we inventorying that properly? I mean, APA has a lot of resources for this and has spent time thinking about this. Those tools that APA provides, do a great job in informing and helping the university get information into a comprehensive condition assessment report from the organizational side. So, I'm not going to work through every single one of these. This is just a sampling I pulled. I mean, there's many more to be gone through in a comprehensive approach. But the idea here is to think a little bit more broadly when we think about condition assessments. Here's an example of, an interview form that, you'd want to take right away. If you're doing a facility operational assessment, hey, what's your role in the organization? What's your relevant experience? What are your responsibilities? You kind of learn this about different people, and then you start to interview them about their challenges and what's going well, what's not going well. So what would you stop doing today? What would you start doing that you haven't done? And then what would you keep doing? These prioritization conversations really can pull a lot about this information out from an institutional knowledge into a documented knowledge using this process and just the example form here. So after we kind of learn, then we want to audit, right? Then we want to get on site, review all of our building systems, architectural, mechanical, and electrical elements in the facility. Think about other things like energy conservation, of course, and safety opportunities. I mean, there's ADA, there's asbestos, there's a whole bunch of things that we need to be thinking about when we get on site. And the main thing I guess I want to leave you with or tell you about on the audit side is really getting in deep. So these are just, these are just pictures, hey, we're going around into this facility. This picture on the bottom left is of the tape measure, is ADA accessibility, hey, is the button at the right height, are the switches at the right height? Are the doorways open and the turns, wide enough for a wheelchair? This approach is one at the component level, okay? And this is actually kind of an industry change because I think a lot of condition assessments look more at the system level. But you really need to get behind the walls. You need to crawl up into those spaces, really understand, what we're looking at, and at the component level, what needs to be replaced, what doesn't, what the risk is if that component fails. I had a recent example of, I was working on a university campus in Utah, and we had about 25 buildings, and all connected into this large chill water plant. And taking an asset inventory, looking through the facilities, and we learned is that, a tiny little piece of equipment, chill water valve in place that bypasses a heat plate exchanger between the plant and the building. It's an extremely important valve because it really determines the efficiency of that entire plant. If those valves are open when they're not supposed to be open, that can it really costs the university, tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of dollars. But what we don't realize is what we found is that some of those valves are stuck open or in bad condition and needed to be replaced. And those wouldn't show up in a more high-level condition assessment because someone would go, valve, that's like a $100 part or a $1,000 part. That's not going to really make my list. I just want to know the big ticket items and prioritize those. Well, if we took into account the operational and the organizational impacts of that equipment, the risk level of that particular piece of equipment, that little valve, becomes actually a very, very high priority, even though it wouldn't fall under your cost of replacement high categories. We often cut it off at, say, $50,000. I don't really need anything on my report that's less than 50 grand. We'll just take care of that as, common operational practice. But, something like that, it's pretty darn important. So we like to take a component level approach and a much more detailed approach to these assessments. So after the audit and assessments, then I talked about, we analyze, crunch the data, build construction grade repair and replacement cost estimates. That's a really key component because, when we're just doing like for like, or we're using databases just like RS Means or something like that for our design costs or our construction costs, we often miss the mark down the road, especially if things are going to be replaced multiple years down the road. Discount rate, inflation, obviously economy changes and construction costs change, and nobody's got a crystal ball on that, but we can sure take a more informed approach when we do that. This is an example of a floor plan that we were looking at recently on a university campus that has 6 different mechanical systems serving one floor. And basically all of the mechanical system is beyond its useful life by a lot and needs to be replaced. Now, if we were to go a traditional route here and say, what's the like-for-like replacement cost of each of these 6 systems, we come up with a cost. We could replace each one of these pieces of equipment, and we might be relatively close on our construction cost prediction, our opinion of probable cost. However, the reality is we don't want to put 6 mechanical systems on this floor again. This goes back to, is this just deferred maintenance we're replacing, or is this investing in our buildings and optimizing efficiencies? We want to think a little bit creatively about this and come up with an opinion of probable cost that's actually probable, meaning we're probably going to do something different. So let's come up with what that cost might be. And that requires some creativity and some conversations between us all to say, okay, how would we approach this and what that look like and what some cost deltas might be. And, before, it's kind of everything up to before you start drawing, right? Because, you don't want to get into design, but you want to have an approach built and an opinion of probable cost about that approach that isn't just like for like, especially in a system like this that's been pulled together over the decades, piece by piece by piece. And then you want to break out those costs.
Hey, Mike, let me jump in for a sec before we get too far into the analytical part. You talked about ADA, and one of the questions comes in. I mean, it's always a challenge funding-wise, and I love what you've mentioned too. We're changing the argument from deferred maintenance, which that can be viewed sometimes in a negative manner. But we're as facilities professionals, we're changing it from deferred maintenance to reinvesting. And I love the word reinvesting in our campuses and the overall optimization of building efficiencies. And that's how we're selling it to our presidents, our chancellors, our chief financial officers. ADA is a component of it. And when you're doing the facilities condition assessments, talk a little bit more about that, Mike, because that's becoming more and more as some universities have been strapped. They haven't been able to address all their ADA needs, but that can run into a lot of challenges if you're not.
Yeah, no problem. This is Phil, by the way, yeah, I think that, the ADA is an important one, and I think it's something that gets overlooked. It's a challenge for universities because, it can be cost prohibitive in cases when we're finding, big changes that need to take place in some of our older buildings that just weren't built for that, right? It's just, they've been grandfathered in for many years, and now they're getting, they're triggering code upgrades, and AHJ is making them upgrade, depending on if you're a state university or a private university, to these ADA compliant spaces that, just weren't built that way. And there's no magic bullet there, right? There's no magic way to think about that. But I think the important thing, at least I'm gonna take my design and construction hat off for a second and answer the question as a facility condition assessment person, is it's really about getting all the information into a place where you understand what those requirements are going to be of you, what's going to trigger those requirements, and what then those potential costs could be. So before you get into the design and construction process or capital upgrade process, you've got a comprehensive knowledge of what the requirements are, what the gap analysis is to get there, and what the situations are where you're going to incur, cost prohibitive costs.
Well, Phil, that was a great question. Actually, that was a question from Mike to Phil.
Okay.
We appreciate that. I know who you are. Let's touch base just a little further on that. Are you required to address all the needs on the ADA, or does it require a certain percentage of the renovation takes place that then kicks in, having to address those challenges?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Chris. It's not, you don't have to do it every time. Each university is a little bit different depending on where they are and if they're public or private, but you don't have to make those adjustments, at least at the code level, unless you're triggering those. So you do need, if you trigger those by saying, we're going to either replace, touch 50% of the square footage in this facility, or we're touching systems that are relevant to the ADA compliance, then we are going to trigger some of those results. And I think it's important to do that research up front to know what your trigger points are. If you're planning on doing, if you're doing the condition assessment and you really have, we're going to be spending $10 million in this facility or $15 million, we're going to do major mechanical replacements or reprogramming or code updates to that tune, you bet you're going to be required to do that. And so you're going to want to know what that is up front when you do your ADA assessment.
And Phil, if you can also, and we have a great question from Rebecca, and she's talking about the ADA transition plan. Should a facilities assessment include an official ADA transition plan? And we're saying, yes, you want to address those needs, but you also want, the communication's critical with our key stakeholders in the building. And Phil, you and McKinstry have done a very nice job in making sure communication is taking place. You want to comment on that, because that needs to happen way upstream and then throughout the entire facilities condition assessment process.
Yeah, so I'll get to the first part of that question on the transition approach and plan. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed up front and talked about, whether you're going to actually produce an official one. It's actually something that's not always part of the condition assessment. It sort of depends on the scale. I think the way we approach that is right in the beginning, when we get into that facility, even kind of before we get started, just putting together kind of a proposal type level walkthrough. What we do is kind of assess we know, right? We kind of know just by walking the building in a day how dramatic of a change is going to need to take place. And at that point, then we want to have that conversation to go, you know what, we're going to need an actual transition plan, pretty comprehensive here, and let's go ahead and include that in the process. Or, you know, we don't think we're going to touch base, we're going to need to get that far, and so we may not include it. So that's how I address that. But on the communication side, yeah, it's critical. You know, we do weekly update meetings every week. We do official kickoff. We do weekly update meetings. We coordinate with the university facilities team on staff for a lot of the information as well. You know, I was talking about the institutional knowledge. You know, there's some specific systems around, you know, life safety and electrical where, you know, there's universities, in my experience, unlike other industries maybe, have a lot of technical expertise and capability among their staff. I was talking about that institutional knowledge. And so we kind of rely on that I think in a positive way, where we want to work together and communicate about what the goals are and sort of the vision for this is and what the intent is, and then be able to pull that information out and communicate with each of the stakeholders. But then the other thing we want to do, in addition to those weekly meetings, is as we start to hone in on replacements and start to get a good idea of the analysis, like basically after we get data done and we do maybe 50%, 60% analysis, we check in kind of a larger format meeting and say, hey, what direction are we going here? Are we going down rabbit holes where you don't really want us to go in terms of like this slide that's up right now? I mean, is it a non-starter to rethink the mechanical system here? I mean, do we really need to patch this up? Our recommendation isn't to put in 6 new mechanical systems on this one floor. It's something different. Tell us your feedback on that. And we kind of brainstorm that, and we kind of communicate together so that when we do get to the final reporting component of this, we've got something that isn't a surprise, where we know what we're getting is what we want. And that's contrasted with basically the approach where you just go in, walk the facilities, write it all down, take 100 pictures, produce a 3-ring binder, and then show up at the end of the project and deliver that to your client. That's the contrast.
That's perfect. One other question before you move to the next slide, if we can. The environmental assessment also, with a number of our buildings that were built, a large percentage, right after World War II, they're now aging out. And so those 1940s, 50s, 60 buildings, and we have a number of challenges. Do you want to touch base on your assessment and how you're addressing those, please?
Yeah, there's, you know, three main things we like to look at. We like asbestos survey, lead-based paint, and mold or air quality issues. And those can be all related things, but you know, that is something that needs to be part of this. And you know, my advice on that is don't ever not make it part of the condition assessment piece. You really want to do some testing, some light, you know, not crazy destructive testing, but some light detective testing, and you want to send some stuff off to the lab during this process, because you know, if you skip that and you just say, no, just give me the mechanical and electrical approach, or you know, I know that I've got some deferred maintenance and issues that I want you to quantify for me, just do that. What you realize is you don't account for the abatement costs, and most of the time there are abatement costs. And once you get into replacing it, you sure as heck are going to have to spend the money. There's no getting around it. You're going to have to abate, or if there's lead-based paint or mold issues, you're going to have to address those in your upgrades. And so I would say absolutely do that in your approach, and also, you know, do it in a way where you're getting enough sampling, enough diversity of sampling that you feel confident about covering the whole facility.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, I'll keep moving if it's okay, Chris. And I just want to wrap up a couple slides because I want to make sure Rick has some time to show us this tool, because I think that's the cool part of the presentation.
I think the beginning's been good too, but keep rolling.
Okay, so keep rolling here. I want to finish up on this analyzation part, or analysis part, in terms of the level of granularity that university facilities directors and stakeholders should expect from their folks. You know, you guys should be expecting, you know, your construction format, whether it's unit format or your different construction divisions, you should be asking and ensuring that that gets broken out so that a general contractor or subcontractors can understand it, and that it is put in a way where, you know, actually how you're going to end up having to pay for it. So we like to break it out. This is just an example from one of ours. We like to break out, obviously things like concrete, footing, slabs, precast, grouting, right? Masonry, metals, wood and plastics. We work through all those. And then we kind of roll up. It gives us an idea, hey, is it mostly plumbing costs or HVAC related, or is it a lot of architectural? And that also includes hazardous material and abatement opinion and probable cost. On the ADA piece, we break out that additionally as well, and don't just include it in the architectural piece if we feel like it's got substantial cost to it. As I said, in the beginning, we take that assessment and we address it one way or another, but we can tell if you're going to have serious ADA costs, we want to break that out separately as well. So it's really called out. So then you finally kind of get into the reporting piece, and this is kind of where I'm going to transfer it over to Rick here in a minute, because it's about using both quantitative and qualitative information to produce visualization of information for your budget and prioritization. So that's the key thing, because when you actually get the data out of these facilities, kind of going back to the beginning of my presentation, there's a lot of data in these facilities. And when you ensure you're getting all of it and you're getting it properly, it's massive. And it's like, you're talking about those of you who have done this before know what I'm talking about. These massive spreadsheets with all kinds of information. And sure, we can roll up some charts and graphs and produce some nice PowerPoints, and that's super helpful and wonderful for presenting to our financial stakeholders. Hey, here's how we compare against other universities. Here's some bar charts for our different building systems and deferred costs. But when you can report in a way that's more dynamic and to prioritize that information, you can actually work with the stakeholders and facilities teams to actually look at other things besides costs, like risk, which I mentioned before. So that report, comes in a typical summary like this. I don't think I'm surprising anybody with this. The space type assessments, costing roll-ups, the energy performance piece is always important to us as McKinstry. We just have we're a performance-based company, so we're always doing a deep dive on the energy side. It's just kind of in our DNA. And then this section 7, I would encourage folks to ask for as well, which is your costing methodology. Understand what assumptions went into that. Sure, you got your number and you got your roll up and it's whatever millions of dollars that you got to pay for, but understand what methodology did your folks take to get to those numbers, and have them spell that out in the report, so that when you're being asked that, you can go back to that and go, here's actually how those numbers came to be. It becomes pretty darn important later in the game. And so to wrap up on the slides, so we're talking about single source facility data, getting that data, filtering that by what's most important to you, accessing it, visualizing it in an important way, and then using that to make good decisions. So with that, I want to, unless Chris wants to ask me any specific questions, I want to turn it over to Rick and let Rick pull us into a little bit of a live demonstration. And he's really coming at it from the point where, as he's setting up, I'll kind of talk for a second. Once you do all your site data, once you get all that information in and you're producing your reports and going through the steps I've been articulating, what we like to do is then put that information in a way that's easy to visualize, that universities can use. And that's what Rick's going to show you now.
I'll tell you, Phil, we're getting a lot of great questions from Frederick and Katie and John and others. But let's go ahead and see this tool, and then we'll have a good 10 minutes of Q&A at the end here.
Thanks, guys. Can you hear me okay, Phil?
You bet I can.
Okay, and can you see my screen?
Good.
Okay, first of all, thanks to everyone on this call. It's a big group, and we are honored to be part of the APA community nationally and locally, and it's an honor to be able to speak to our peers. If you take away anything from this presentation, I hope it's that we are all working together to try and figure out how to get a level playing field for facilities folks, how to optimize our facilities in service of our missions, and most importantly, how to make great decisions. And so what we're going to show is really building on Philip's introduction. You cannot put a proper value on the value of robust data, and increasingly all of that data, more data than we can handle, is available. And so the key is we want to be able to communicate that in a way that helps us make those great decisions and optimize our facilities. When I was prepping for my Certified Energy Manager exam, My instructor was the plant and utilities manager at the University of Cincinnati. And he said half of his time was dedicated to the political effort of just trying to win resources for his efforts. I will never know as much as him. He was brilliant, but it stuck in my brain that as much as we can contribute to actually collecting the data, more importantly almost is the ability to communicate and make a case for the resources that we need. So I'm going to step you through a way that we do that here to build that data into powerful communications tools and scenario planning. What you're looking at is a Tableau software visualization. Most people are familiar with Tableau. It's an incredibly powerful engine. I will say that the tool itself is not the point. It's the data that drives it, and again, what you do with it. Our goal is to put technology in service of people, not to make technology the end unto itself. So I'm going to step through a couple of examples of different projects that we've done, facility assessment projects, and how we present that data in a very unique way given the customer's needs and wants. So you're looking at a small campus here in the Puget Sound region. You can see some very obvious things, building footprints, color code. The powerful thing about Tableau is that you can manipulate information in just about any way that you want, filter down, and again, there's almost an infinite number of ways to present this information. So right away we see there are some red, some hot spots that we need to focus on. These are our top priorities. And then it goes back to all the way up the gradient to green. So these are facilities that ostensibly that they're not as critical or urgent of a priority. Now, how do we get there? Again, all of the information that is going into this tool is collected during that powerful facility condition assessment process. Again, we have to crawl through facilities. We want to interview everyone who has influence on the operations and maintenance of facilities to understand the native intelligence, and then we want to put that into a database so that we're institutionalizing it and giving ourselves a really powerful foundation from which to communicate. What Tableau allows us to do is to dump all of those thousands and thousands of line items, those 6-inch binders that Philip showed in his photo, to condense that into some really powerful visualizations and snapshots. So for example, this is just another way to represent all of the equipment and architectural systems on this particular campus. We can drill down into just about anything. We can look only at HVAC, for example. We can look only at a particular building, for example. We get to see hotspots, quickly identify what we need to further focus on. And so again, these color codes just allow us to drill down. You can also see some information tied into each of these buildings and subcategories of assets, and I'll get into how we go about ranking those. What's most important is that you have here a way to communicate all of the comprehensive needs and then drill down more specifically. So for example, these are all of the assets on this particular campus. You can see the information over here on the right. We can start to filter. So we see different scores. We see average remaining life. It should be cause for concern that our average remaining life across this campus and all of its equipment and systems is -2, which means we have some deferred issues. We also see a pretty big number for a campus of this size in terms of the net present value cost of addressing all of the priorities. So, and that is not something that we can't address. We can start to seek to a goal. If we only have a $10 million budget, we can start to adjust all these priorities. So for example, maybe we want to look specifically at a unique building, or we only want to, for example, look at things that have a remaining life of, say, 5 years, the most urgent needs, all right? So we can quickly filter every single line item in that FCA, and look over here, we've reduced our budget by more than half. And then we can further start to refine, look at each individual building, or look at a subcategory of systems. Most importantly in this, again, in the ability to communicate, is all of the information that goes into this. And so you can see every single one of these quadrangles is a piece of equipment or a building component. Here we have a bright red air handling unit. This campus has a lot of rooftop units. and they're old and outdated. We've seen some pretty concerning conditions on these rooftops. And so let's look at what the customer decided were the key performance indicators here. Well, obviously estimated life remaining. That is a combination of data between industry standards such as ASHRAE and our subjective analysis. We have one of the largest service teams in the Pacific Northwest, so we have real cost of replacement data and estimated life data that goes into this ranking system. Asset condition is another subjective analysis. Classroom impact, that's a key performance indicator that's of high value to the customer or the client. And so we want to know, if this air handler goes out, what does that mean for the classrooms that it serves? All right. The replacement cost, again, that is a combination of industry data and subjective analysis based on our regional costs. And then everything goes into a total weighted ranking. We can adjust other criteria to change this ranking, and that's important. So for example, you see other filtering mechanisms at the top of this page. We can filter according to any number of KPIs. If classroom impact was the big one, we could go there. We have other customers who focus on, say, lost revenue in the case of a healthcare facility. We have energy metrics such as energy performance. Any number of metrics can be added onto this objective equipment, remaining life, and replacement cost data. So I'm going to move really quickly here so we have enough time for questions. Key to this is that we can further prioritize. So for example, if we want to change the weighting because we know that the HVAC system is most important, we can change that weighting up here, and it will, again, filter our priorities so that we know we can create scenarios according to our various priorities. So for example, with this tool, we could say in one scenario, we are going to seek to only the equipment that has a very short remaining life so we can get to our most urgent needs. In others, we could say, you know, we know that we have HVAC and lighting problems, or maybe that lighting, because it has a fast payback, is going to help us buy down the cost of some of our other replacements. So we're going to focus only on those two aspects of our campus to create a project. So we do that a lot as an energy services company, for example. Again, the key here is that you can create scenarios across an almost infinite number of criteria, and then that all rolls up into a net present value. So you can adjust your discount rate and your inflation rate. In this case, you can see it's a pretty straight line analysis. Importantly, this runs out to 30 years for replacement. So here we have, you can filter according to, maybe you only want to look at your first replacement, but maybe you want to look at your entire 30-year analysis. So if your piece of equipment has an estimated life of 15 years and you select second and third replacements, we're going to see it in year 1, and then we're going to see it again down the road in year 16. So this tool automatically updates. If you go in year 3 and make that replacement, it's going to automatically run this calculation again out to 15 years out. So it's constantly, you can constantly update this tool according to the ongoing work, all right? And then you can see the roll-ups. You can see the net present value of the total costs according to all of your filtering criteria for each building. You can further refine this down, and then most importantly, let's get back to what do we actually do with it. So this is a way to export all of those priorities according to your criteria into a project list. And that's where we really get to the ability to communicate. This is say, call it scenario 1. We can export this and say, here's absolutely the equipment we need to address in the next 1 to 5 years. And you can go back to your portfolio map and communicate. You can see that these colors have changed based on the priorities that we've set. So again, D was originally bright red because we had the criteria set a certain way. Now it's yellow because it doesn't have as much critical years 1 to 5 equipment. All right. I'm going to just very quickly show you a couple of others. So this is an example of a district. A lot of campuses or universities and colleges have their facilities spread out across a district. Again, this is a powerful way to show all of the assets within the portfolio, the net present value of total costs, and this is a school district. So we have about 47 schools within that. You can see the total score. And then the size of the circle is indicative of the amount of the replacement cost, and the color obviously is the criticality. So we know big circle, lots of red, it's a priority. All right. Again, it's the exact same roll up according to all of the assets represented in a single dashboard, super powerful communications tool. And again, every single one of these quadrangles has a wealth of information underneath of that. You can see here, for example, one of the KPIs that this client wanted was an EUI rating. Again, classroom impact and education service. And then the same categories down below in terms of the ability to prioritize across a lot of different customer criteria. You can even, if you say that this facility is going to be mothballed next year, you can zero that out so that it doesn't get factored into your analysis. Cost roll-ups are the same, this is really powerful for school districts, for example, because they're doing bond planning. They need very specific ways to communicate. All right, and the final one I'm going to show you is a specific building example. This is applicable because a lot of campuses have very diverse facilities. We're also often dealing with, very high-tech facilities, critical care facilities, or critical environment facilities. This is an example of a building-specific FCA that we conducted, and this is a cross-section of that facility. It's very iconic here in the Puget Sound. You can very quickly see what are your top priorities according to floor. And this is in part determined by the service lines that are served by that equipment. And so, for example, this particular healthcare facility, they have 4 different categories. And if we wanted to, we could focus only on their top revenue generators, those 5 core service areas. We can then reverse engineer, look at what equipment and systems serve those spaces. And what this does is it allows us to not only make great decisions, but also get on a level playing field so that when we go to the budget committee, we can show them that although, yes, the new MRI equipment for the hotshot doctor is important, as important as that is actually supplying power and proper ventilation to that space. So what this does is gives us a powerful way to communicate and get on a level playing field as the facilities crew. Phil, I'm going to hand it back to you so we can get some questions in.
Yeah, that sounds good. And maybe before you do that, Rick, I guess I'll put my screen back up. That's okay. I was just going to say if any of the questions you needed to navigate, but I think we do have a few minutes left here before noon. So, Chris, if you want to take it away with some Q&A, we can move into that.
We have more questions than we're going to have time, but let's go ahead and jump right in. One of the questions came about renovating versus demo. And so when are you making recommendations on that with some of our older buildings based on cost per square foot?
That is
early
a great
on.
Question.
Yeah, Rick, do you want to take go for it, Rick?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get asked that across all the vertical markets we serve to support real estate planning. And so the question, subjectively is, at what point do we stop throwing money into this dog and start investing in something else, right? And so we are doing that using a projection of the cost, the criticality of equipment and the estimated life. And then we factor in the cost of maintaining or updating that equipment. And then we project that out. And at some point there does cross over with the line of, well, if we just invested in a new facility, whether on the same site or, went through disposition and invested in a new site, there is a point at which those cross. And so we're using this data. It's a great question because it's really where every customer is taking us is, help us make those great decisions, not just about what to do with this facility, but how to invest our overall portfolio.
And you're looking at... Go ahead.
I was just going to tag on real quick on that, and that's why it becomes, typically it's more expensive to build a new building, right? The cost per square foot of construction, depending on which building exactly, it's almost always cheaper to use the existing building. But that's why we talk about during the FCA process the organizational component of that, because how is the space going to be used over the next 10 years? What's the programming and organizational approach for that? And funding, where's the funding coming from? Because sometimes people will fund a new building, but not necessarily maintenance an old one. So there's different components that we want to take into consideration, not just cost per square foot, although most of the time it is cheaper to work with the existing building.
And what we're finding with these older buildings too, the envelope is very solid, and that leads to a question from Richard. Are you capturing the exterior envelope in your overall facilities condition assessment?
Yeah, we are. We're capturing the exterior of the facility as well. So on the campuses, we're looking at fenestration, envelope, doors, windows, roof, piping, venting, and we're also looking at even sewer. We just did one, we were just out in Arizona this week or last week talking about the sewer piping. So we'll put a camera down the sewer drain and take that all the way out to the main line to see, hey, is that pipe even still there, or is it eroded away into clay, or what's taking place out into some of the main lines? So the condition assessments take into account every construction division. That's why I had that slide up with the opinion of probable cost that had the different categories. What we want to do is address every category on that facility that fits into the uniformat or master divisions of the construction. That way we're not going to miss anything.
Perfect. We got several technical questions on the computer base and the tabloid. One is regarding the GIS system from Katie. Is your mapping GIS based?
Yes, it is. Great question. So, for example, we will geocode all of the assets in a parks division for a city, literally every light post and park bench. It becomes a little bit more difficult when you get into the nuts and bolts interior of a building, geocoding things. So we're working on tagging things to CAD-based floor plans. But yes, right now everything has a Latin law and coordinate, and that's how the map is built.
And some of those, so Rick didn't show you, but some of these too that are more building specific actually go and basically take a program layout of each floor, and then we can create heat maps and color gradients based on replacements and issues across geocoding inside of the building and overlaying the floor plans and the architecturals. And sometimes we can translate that actually into drawings in BIM. So that kind of creates some glue there between systems when you actually get into design. But the other thing I wanted to mention was, each one of these gets a lat and a longitude, but we do that also kind of outside of the norm as well when it comes to things like, say, metering, for example, on a university campus, electric, gas, water meters, sub-meters in a building. Sometimes obviously meters are, you can have 10 electrical meters in one building sometimes. And what we do there is we like to create a map of all that information and geocode it kind of in the same visualization Rick was showing, but we do that basically, it's actually not that tough if you got service, because you can go around and pin yourself on your phone, right? Create a waypoint and then put, that gets the latitude and the longitude, and then you can map it over GIS.
All right, guys, we're going to keep on rolling. We may actually, normally we don't, but we may go just a couple minutes over today. We still have a large audience still on, and we got a lot of questions. One of the questions comes to that APA has just finished the ANSI standard for a total cost of ownership, 1,000 standard on total cost. And we're going to want to have some conversations on the facilities condition assessments and how they tie into the APA ANSI standard. And so we'll have that offline, and we can supply some additional information. Going back to the tabloid though, Rick, one person's asking, Brian Wilcox is asking, can you tie that software program into the software program of the maintenance department that's keeping all this information as the historical data?
Yeah, great question. So we work, as you probably expect, and I think every service provider does this. We work extensively with CMMS, work management systems, and work order management systems. And so what we do is batch upload. And so it's difficult to, and we call it pointing the viz or the Tableau visualization at a database that is proprietary, and there's some issues around access for that. But it is integrated as much as possible at this point with CMMS and work management systems And what we're often doing is just a little bit of a workaround, which is to, again, export a list and then batch upload. And if you have ideas around how to point that viz, the Tableau tool, more directly at another piece of proprietary software, please get a hold of me.
And guys, we're going to do rapid.
I'll add that real quick because there's two sides to that coin. There's batch uploading data and getting in talking to CMMS on the back end with the information, and then there's also the loading on the front end. Because I don't know if anybody caught it, but some of this, when Rick was going pretty quick through some of those visualizations, but work order volume is also a component we look at. You know, that's a key assessment. What's the work order volume taking place? How much time are we spending on this old equipment? How much is that costing us? And so we want to batch in that information as well. So there's a front end component we like to get as well. And Rick's right. You know, we can't work with every proprietary system under the sun. Most of us know how to work with a lot of those systems, but you know, in terms of automating, some of that works great, but not all of them.
Guys, we're going to do rapid fire real quick here for the next 2 minutes and then start wrapping it up. But one of the questions came about just overall estimating. When should you be estimating? What level of project should you do a cost estimate? A new roof may be worth it, but do you do the hardware within a building? Phil?
Yeah, you get all the information for cost estimating down to the nuts and bolts as we were showing you and Rick was showing you, and then you prioritize and then you systematize, meaning you look at what's connected to what, and when you do an evaluation of like-for-like costs, what you have to add to that is constructability. So we do a constructability analysis as well, and that's what gives us the ability to answer that decision of when we do the roof, should we also do X and then do Y based on mobilization costs mostly.
And we would say, as you're looking for the dollars, if you're looking at addressing the entire building, you want to be all inclusive, all the way down to those fine items, fixtures, door locks, all that adds up when you're talking a 4, 5, 6-story building. So you want to be all inclusive in that. You also want to be looking at priorities, priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, based on how far you can go ahead and stretch that dollar. And Phil, I know you guys go ahead and break items down into that key finite information.
Yep.
Next one we have about utility creeping. And Phil, near and dear to your heart is energy savings. And so comment on that, because FCAs are critical in looking at more efficient use of the buildings.
Yeah, and that actually ties back into what you're mentioning with the ANSI-APA total cost of ownership piece. You know, and that's why we look at net present value over time, because buildings drift. You know, Lawrence Berkeley Labs talks about 6% a year of drifting across, drifting in terms of becoming less efficient. Performance goes down, costs go up over time. So when we look to these types of assessments, we always do an energy performance assessment, benchmark, and then take into account the impacts of the recommendations from a total cost of ownership perspective, saying, well, not only is the capital cost X, but there's also savings associated with that. We typically don't look just, to replace something that's perfectly good. If it, might be a more efficient version, we try to marry those things and say, we need to replace this because of X, Y, and Z reasons, risk, past its life, et cetera. And here's how we're going to do it to invest in it, make it better, and then battle against that drift and ensure that stuff is commissioned when you do it. That's the other component I just want to mention, Chris, briefly, is that commissioning is critical at that point, because we often think just commissioning when we're building a whole new building. But we got to be commissioning this stuff when we're doing replacements and maintenance and improvements, in the hundred thousands of dollars range, not just the millions.
And that was a definitely question we had from John regarding commissioning, and you're spot on. That's critical that you're making sure you're getting what you need and you have that commissioning agent. We also have a couple other here in terms of the replacement cost standard for a facilities condition assessment. You reviewed that in detail. We will go ahead and take these questions and supply answers, and they will be posted also on the APA webpage. Guys, we have just a couple more minutes, and then we're going to wrap it up. Rick, is there any final thoughts you want to share with us?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I think the key here is that the goal is to make great decisions, and we want to put technology in service of that. So to the extent that we can, first create value by simply gathering the data, that is the first step. The technology alone is not the solution. And then second, we want to partner so that we can create these scenarios quickly and create a great way to communicate with folks who write checks. All right. And this work is constantly evolving. That's the next thing. And so we're looking for ways to further integrate from capital planning across operations and maintenance, ways to add other KPIs. And so this is an exciting and rapidly evolving tool and service. And we're excited about the opportunity to do that with the APA community.
Well, thank you, Rick. Phil, how about you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just leave the one final thought is take the long view, everyone. So when anybody comes to do a condition assessment, they have a particular problem or issue they want to deal with, meaning they want to create a capital plan or answer a question of how much money they need to go ask for, or they want to do, or they have specific funding and they want to do a specific projects in 5 to 15 buildings or something. And I would just say, when you do that, take the long view and don't solve the problem just for yourself at that time, but invest in your university and give them something that can stay alive and stay up to date, so they don't have to come back and hire McKinstry or somebody else 2 years later or even 5 years later to go and do that same thing again.
Well, Rick and Phil, I just want to thank you very much for everybody on APA taking the time. We could continue going on for another hour. We have a lot of folks still on the line here, but I want to be respectful of your time too, and we appreciate very much you sharing your knowledge on harnessing the noise. And we're changing the argument from deferred maintenance to really optimizing our buildings, reinvesting in our buildings, working with our chief financial officers and our presidents. So thank you both again. These APA webinar series have been very successful. We are actually looking at doing a back-to-back in February. We are having a large interest in these webinars. We are going to be partnering with Siemens on February 21st, and then the next day, we are looking at our collaborative efforts with ASHRAE and the soon-to-be incoming president, Darrell Boyce, of doing an overall review of ASHRAE and the great opportunities that are there with ASHRAE and APA as we continue looking at our collaborative efforts, the BEQ, and other items. March, we're looking at taking the Thought Leaders series onto the air. And we have Nina, who has been heavily involved with the Thought Leaders series. We're going to be talking about our campus risk. There's an actual Thought Leader series taking place in February, and we're now going to bring that onto the air in March. And then we have just an outstanding opportunity that we're going to meet with some students from the University of Arizona, Students for Sustainability, and we're going to be having really a solid discussion about sustainability, and then also how do we go ahead and engage students within our facilities management field. That will be in April, and then also we're going to go ahead and Steve from Western Michigan, near and dear to his heart is our custodial field, and how do we integrate that, work with ISSA, and we're going to be having a webinar coming up in the near future on that. The topics keep flowing in. If you have something that you're really interested, please feel free to drop me a note, text me, give me a call. And again, this is our way of harnessing and transferring the knowledge, giving back to our members so you have useful information. The presentation will be on the APA webpage in about a week, along with the questions. And again, Phil, Rick, thank you very much from everybody at APA. We appreciate very much you taking your time and extending it a little bit too. Thank you guys, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you.